Which do you think is a bigger number? The amount of steps it would take for you to walk around the Earth's equator, let's say 10 times, or the amount of microplastics that are probably inside your body at this given moment? I'll give you a couple seconds to think about that. The answer is actually the latter. If you're around 18, you have an estimated 54 million microplastics inside your body, which in steps would be enough to walk around the Earth's equator not 10, but 13 whole times. And that's just if you're 18. If you're well into your adulthood, you can imagine how much bigger that number might be. We are in constant exposure to microplastics. They are everywhere, in everything, all at once, and very simply all the time. Now, one of the ways that we get microplastics into our system is through inhalation. We inhale microplastics that break off from common things within our indoor environment, such as fabric, because, synthetic materials are primarily made out of plastics, and dust that accumulates microplastics from things that break off from plastic materials. We also come into contact with these microplastics in our outdoor environment, as air tends to be polluted from plastics from roads, construction, industrial emissions, and deteriorated plastic waste. These microplastics are then very easily airborne into our system every single time that we breathe. Because, we kind of need to be doing that. Next would be through skin contact and absorption. Skin absorbs whatever you put on it, especially with long-term exposure. From clothes and fabrics, again, synthetic textiles, and these release plastic microfibers once used, as well as microplastics that are included in cosmetics and personal care products, all acting as frequent exposure to microplastics. So that skincare routine you, I hope, are doing every night, you might want to rethink that. And while dermal contact is generally a less significant form of exposure to microplastics, in comparison to ingestion and inhalation, it still acts as a means of increased exposure. But the most common way that we consume microplastics is via indigestion. Eating food out of plastic containers, using plastic textiles, or even eating any food that has had any exposure to plastic at some point, which realistically is all of them. The point is, what you eat is most likely garnished with plastic. Not so appealing now, huh?
And maybe you're thinking that plastic is kind of like a gum. Well, it is, because gum is made of plastic, but that's beside the point. But what I'm trying to say is that, so earlier we mentioned before about how plastic is made from chemically created polymers, and because of this chemical composition, it makes plastic impossible to break down, even with the help of our stomach acids. Because plastic is genuinely and entirely inorganic, our digestive enzymes don't recognize it as something that can be digested. That, plus the extremely strong intermolecular bonds that these polymers have that make it so resistant to degradation in the first place, means that the plastics remain as plastics in our bodily systems. As mentioned earlier, our bodies are constantly exposed to microplastics, and as they continue to enter our body and they continue to stay longer in there will be some detrimental effects to our body. Hence, we will go through them one by one. Microplastics can affect our nervous system. According to Huang et al., recent studies show that in mice, small-sized microplastics can penetrate the blood-brain barrier, a protective shield that normally prevents harmful substances from entering the brain, which damages the brain tissue. This damage can affect the learning and memory function in mice. Similarly, recent studies show that microplastics can infiltrate our central nervous system through inhaling, and similar to what scientists found in mice, blood barrier penetration, where microplastics can pass through this protective barrier, especially when inflammation weakens it. Once inside, these particles can damage brain tissue and interfere with normal brain function. They trigger oxidative stress and neuroinflammation, which harm neurons and disrupt communication between brain cells. This leads to learning and memory impairment, as well as other forms of neurological dysfunction. Over time, these effects may resemble early signs of neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's or Parkinson's diseases. In short, microplastic exposure doesn't just threaten the environment, it may also compromise the brain's ability to think, remember, and regulate behavior. Next, microplastics doesn't just affect the brain, they also pose serious risks to the respiratory system. When inhaled, these tiny particles can travel deep into the lungs, reaching the alveoli where gas exchange occurs. Studies have shown that microplastics in the air can trigger inflammatory responses and cause lung tissue damage. Over time, this leads to scarring and reduced lung elasticity, making it harder for the lungs to function properly. In fact, Workers exposed to high concentrations of airborne microplastics have shown signs of interstitial lung diseases, characterized by inflammation and fibrosis, or scarring, of lung tissue. This condition severely limits oxygen exchange and can cause chronic breathing difficulties. Microplastics also disrupt the protective lung barrier, increasing vulnerability to infections and diseases like asthma and pneumonia. In animal studies, mice exposed to levels of microplastics produced excess mucus and developed symptoms similar to asthma and pneumonia. To conclude, prolonged exposure to microplastics can lead to pulmonary inflammation, impaired lung function, and increase the risk of respiratory diseases, showing how deeply these pollutants can affect human health.
Up next, let's talk about our liver. Never. Anyways, the liver is the largest gland in the human body and one of its most vital organs. It manages metabolism by breaking down, transforming, and synthesizing proteins, fats, and sugars. But when microplastics enter the bloodstream, they can reach the liver and disrupt these essential processes. Once inside, microplastics can damage liver cells, including the DNA in the nucleus and mitochondria. This triggers the release of pro-inflammatory cytokines, molecules that promote inflammation and lead to liver fibrosis, the buildup of scar tissue that weakens liver function over time. The accumulation of microplastics in liver tissue also interferes with lipid metabolism, preventing normal fatty acid processing. This imbalance can cause fatty liver disease, a condition where excess fat builds up in liver cells and reduces their efficiency. Studies on zebrafish have shown that microplastics exposure alters fatty acid, amino acid, and carbon metabolism, leading to disorders in glucose and lipid regulation. These metabolic disruptions mirror what could happen in humans with chronic exposure. Microplastics can even absorb toxic substances like heavy metals, including cadmium. When these contaminated particles accumulate, they can cause iron-related cell death in the liver, a form of toxicity that further accelerates liver damage. In short, microplastics exposure can lead to inflammation, fibrosis, and metabolic dysfunction in the liver, compromising its ability to detoxify the body and maintain healthy metabolism.
In the intestines, microplastics can accumulate through the food we eat and the air we breathe. While larger microplastics are excreted, smaller microplastics can enter intestinal tissues. Inside the gut, microplastics disturb the microbial community, leading to intestinal barrier dysfunction and metabolic disorders. The gut microbiome or gut flora plays a vital role in digestion because it regulates intestinal movement, digestive juice secretion, nutrient absorption, and protects against pathogens. But when exposed to high concentrations of microplastics, the species and number of microorganisms changes, thus creating an imbalance in intestinal flora. This imbalance causes the release of toxic bacterial products, which triggers inflammation and weakens the immune system. As a result, the body becomes vulnerable to infections, chronic diseases, and nutrient metabolism disorders.
Alright, I swear we're nearing the end of our list, but we're just trying to inform you of them, okay? Hang on tight. Microplastics don't only harm the lungs, liver, or gut. Hear this. They can also severely affect the kidneys, which are responsible for filtering waste and maintaining the body's fluid balance. Studies in mice have shown that exposure to microplastics can cause significant kidney damage. The main mechanism behind this is oxidative stress, which triggers inflammation and leads to tissue injury. When microplastics enter the bloodstream and are absorbed by kidney cells, they stimulate the production of mitochondrial reactive oxygen species, or ROS. These molecules damage cell structures and activate proteins linked to oxidative stress and inflammation. At the same time, microplastics can alter gene expression in kidney cells, especially genes related to endoplasmic reticulum stress and autophagy, the process by which cells remove damaged components. This dysregulation disrupts normal cellular repair and accelerates kidney injury. Over time, these combined effects, oxidative stress, inflammation, and disruptive signaling pathways, lead to renal dysfunction, reducing the kidney's ability to filter toxins and maintain homeostasis. Lead to renal dysfunction, reducing the Over time, these combined effects, oxidative stress, inflammation, and disruptive signaling pathways, lead to renal dysfunction, reducing the kidney's ability to filter toxins and maintain homeostasis, meaning microplastic exposure can cause inflammatory responses, oxidative damage, and cellular stress, all of which contribute to significant impairment of kidney function. Now we are down to our last health risk, and can you guess what it is? Well, as it turns out, microplastics can also affect our reproductive organs. When microplastics accumulate in the reproductive organs, they can cause reproductive toxicity. In male mice, these particles induce testicular inflammation and destroy the blood-testis barrier, which normally protects developing sperm cells. In females, microplastics can cause ovarian inflammation, reduce the first polar body extrusion rate, and lower the superovulation survival rate. These effects lead to poor oocyte quality and decreased fertility. They can also induce apoptosis, or programmed cell death in ovarian granulosa cells, and cause uterine pyroptosis and fibrosis through oxidative stress. Over time, these changes can result in infertility in female mice. For males, on the other hand, microplastics tend to accumulate in the testes where they cause inflammation and damage the blood-testis barrier, a structure that protects developing sperm cells from harmful substances. Microplastics also activate the NF-κB and P38-MAPK signaling pathways, both of which trigger inflammation and cellular stress. This results in abnormal sperm development, a decrease in sperm count and mobility, Microplastics also activate the NF-κB and P38-MAPK signaling pathways, both of which trigger inflammation and cellular stress. This results in abnormal sperm development, a decrease in sperm count and motility, and an increase in sperm malformation rate. Because of this, we can say that microplastic exposure can impair reproductive capacity in both sexes, alongside causing metabolic disorders in the liver, pulmonary inflammation, renal dysfunction, and intestinal flora imbalance.
We live in a plastic-filled world, and through that, our bodies are paying the price of it. With problems comes great solutions. If plastic was designed to be durable forever, why not redesign it to be durable only when used and degrade after? Microplastics have two categories, primary and secondary. Primary microplastics are tiny particles with voluntary microbeads that are accidentally discharged or after byproduct and are utilized in manufacturing of resin pellets. The biggest issue here is the secondary microplastic, as this comes from the larger items that fragmented into millions of tiny pieces, since they are essentially designed for failure.
Let's look at alternatives to durable plastics. True biodegradable polymers break down into harmless organic compounds in soil or water, unlike oxidogradable plastics that only fragment. They're made of biomasses like cellulose or alginate or biodegradable polyesters. Enzyme-embedded plastics contain sleeping enzymes that activate with heat or moisture, speeding up decomposition. And low-shedding textiles redesign fabrics to reduce microfiber release during washing, helping limit synthetic fiber pollution. Bio-based living remediations uses microorganisms and plants to break down or remove pollutants like oil, industrial chemicals, and pesticides from soil and water. This natural process converts contaminations to harmless bioproducts, effectively cleaning ecosystems while generating useful materials. In microplastics, atmospheric control helps reduce the risk of breathing in tiny plastic particles. This can be done by using less plastic, improving air filtrations indoors, and changing daily habits to reduce fiber shedding. Since these particles can easily go back into the air, both personal actions and larger environmental efforts are needed. At home, you can lower your exposure by using HEPA filters, cleaning with wet clothes or mops instead of dry dusting, using vacuums with HEPA filters, and keeping spaces well ventilated. The main goal is a circular economy where plastic waste is eliminated, because no plastic waste means no microplastics.
So to recap what we have learned today, not only is plastic a problem of environmental pollution, such as when heaps of plastic cover entire coastlines or create mountain-sized landfills, but also a public health and policy issue. We may not eat 18 million microplastics in one sitting, let alone willingly, but because of how widespread it is, especially in how our food is handled, how our clothes are made, and perhaps most importantly in the air we breathe, it accumulates within us without our consent. Microplastics make living somewhat of a double-edged sword. We need to eat in order to sustain ourselves, yet our food is garnished with indigestible microplastics. We need to clothe ourselves in order to keep warm, yet microplastics leach into our skins through absorption. We need to breathe in order to live, but every inhalation contains plastics particulates. The ingestion of microplastics, for example, has a direct negative impact on the hormone-producing and regulatory processes our organs go through in order to maintain proper function and in turn, keep the body healthy. These scenarios only emphasize how much of an immediate and legitimate concern the presence of microplastics in the human body, and in extension, global health is. Fortunately, recent scientific innovations and policy efforts have provided us with multiple possible solutions to this problem. Among these are synthesis of biodegradable polymers, enzyme-embedded plastics, low-shedding textiles, advanced filtration, bio-based and living remediation, atmospheric microplastic control, and indoor control and mitigation strategies. However, these solutions will only be as fruitful as the scale in which they are implemented. This means that 1 or 2 households implementing atmospheric microplastic control, 3 food product companies using biodegradable polymers in their packaging, or 4 countries implementing circular economies won't solve the global microplastic problem. In a time of intense globalization, we must recognize the effect of global systems of plastic production in our individual lives, and in consequence how it affects our individual health, and work together towards implementing better alternatives as an active practice of global citizenship for a better future. Thank you for watching.